get my 6. I was trying to mix it up a little bit there and do it a little bit differently. Hope I didn't scare you. Actually, I hope I did, because as of this recording, we're just 2 days away from Halloween, my favorite holiday. I mean, I kind of am responsible for inventing it. Not really. Okay. I have several Halloween stories for you here today, but I want to show you a couple things first. I hope I do this right, because I really don't know how to edit and stuff. I'm like almost 50. I know how to like push record and stop and upload. That's pretty much it. But here we go. Me and my beautiful bride Dearly and our son Daniel, we just made some jack-o'-lanterns and we took a picture, and I want to show you our artwork. Check this out. All right. Yeah, so I do that with my hand. So when I try to insert that picture, when I'm asking my wife to help me do it, because she's a millennial, she understands it. I know. Okay. Oh, great. I'm going to insert a picture there, and there's not supposed to be one. Okay, I'm going to show you another picture. I did something that I'm very proud of, and I'm not showing this to brag, not even humble brag. I did invent a word a couple years ago called a humble salt. You remember that? It's when these passive-aggressive people like try to make it look like they're complimenting you, but they're really insulting you. It's called a humble salt. Don't forget that word, folks. I want that word to like be in the dictionary someday. So anyway, quickly, then I'll get on to the Halloween stuff, okay? Because I know a lot of you folks come here for the spooky, creepy stuff. In January of this year, we're now, of course, the end of October, I weighed 193 pounds, which, you know, I'm 5'9". I used to be 5'10", and then I went to airborne school, and after jumping out of planes, I lost an inch. True story. But I'm 5'9", I weighed 193 pounds. I've never weighed that much in my life, and I just didn't like it. And so I changed some things. I would always go out and run for 20 minutes, 3 or 4 days a week. And I thought, I ran today. Well, my metabolism's slower because I am almost 50. And I've spent my life eating pretty much whatever I wanted to eat, whenever I wanted to eat it, because I'd always been so active. My philosophy has always been that if the fire's hot enough, the furnace will burn it. Well, my fire has not been quite as hot with, you know, age, and 20 minutes, 3 or 4 days a week. Come on, man. So I started running more, and I have consistently been running 30 miles a week for about 3 months straight now. Okay, look, started the year at 193, right? Let me show you this. 168.8 this morning. So 68, 78, 88, 89, 90, and then 3. 25 pounds. I've lost 25 pounds this year. And just from like, you know, I've kind of transitioned from being a guy who runs back to being a runner. And it's been a long time. And by the way, yeah, Carrie D, some old woman down there in Georgia. And of course, it's ironic, I have a sister, Carrie D, over in West by God, Virginia. But the Carrie D in Georgia is always saying stay hydrated. Trust me, I know. I'm like a runner again. So here's my point to that. I'm proud of that. I really am. And I'm actually going to start racing. I've been telling my family that if I get down to 160 anything, I'm going to race again. So I think next week I'm going to race 5K. But here's the point. If you want to make a change in your life, just go do it. And don't expect it to come quickly. I could have gone, you know, eating 1 boiled egg a day and only drinking water and dropped 25 pounds in 6 weeks. And then guess what? Once I started eating normally again, I would have gained the 25 pounds back in 6 weeks. That's how it works. But if you're just consistent and you're persistent and you do it the right way, the correct way, you can take it off and keep it off. So I just want to share that with you guys. Thanks for letting me share that. Now, Halloween, the reason we're here. Okay, so I've never told this story, and this story takes like 60 seconds or less. So this is just one of a couple stories you're going to hear about Halloween here. I was in a C-130, had my helmet on, my body armor, sitting there with a couple hundred of my battle buddies. We were flying from Kuwait, where we had been for 3 weeks, into Mosul, Iraq, okay, to start our deployment. We pre-mobed out of Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, beautiful place. Then we spent 3 weeks in Kuwait to get used to the time difference and the climate, which we never did. 130 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. I never got used to that. And the wind, when it would blow, the sand was so hot. Like if you had your shorts on, like if you're in your PT outfit, the black Army shorts and the gray shirt that says Army, and you left the tent to go to the porta potty, because that's all we had. We didn't have running water and all that. When that sand hit you, it felt like you were being stabbed with needles that someone had held to a lighter. I mean, it was amazing. It was crazy, but we were there for 3 weeks, and then we flew into Mosul, okay? Al-Qaeda in Iraq's last stronghold in Iraq before we went in. I was part of the surge, General Petraeus' surge, pushing them up into Syria, where they, of course, laid down their weapons and said, we're just going to wait until that Obama guy takes over because he's going to pull you guys out of here. Then we're going to come back. And that's how it happened. And then, of course, the Obama administration called them ISIS, so that you would think it was somebody different than Al-Qaeda in Iraq. It was basically the same group, but, you know, if you tell the sheeple somebody different, they'll think it's somebody different. Like Facebook, trying to change their name now, Zuckerberg, sadly, he's going to pull it off. Philip Morris did it. They changed their name to Altria 3 years later. It was like, oh, Altria, they make food and mayonnaise and blah, blah, blah. They didn't kill all those people telling them cigarettes were safe to smoke when they knew that it wasn't. And I'm not being political. I'm being real, okay? So anyway, flying into Mosul, terrified. It's crazy. Everybody felt like we had to pee, but we couldn't. We didn't have to. That's how terrifying this was, okay? And I said to myself, I'm definitely going to remember this for the rest of my life. This was 12 or 13 years ago, and here I'm telling you about it. And I said, well, I want to make sure I know the date. I looked at my watch. You know what the date was? October 31. So friends, somebody's getting ready for deer season. There were no ghosts, there were no ghouls, there were no witches and vampires and werewolves, but that was the most terrifying Halloween of my life. Pardon me, I'm a bit parched. All right, now, with that said, and with that in mind, we're going to get to today's story. It's one of many things that inspired this book, Isle of Kapre. Yeah, written by this guy. You know, it's a story that takes place in the Philippines. See that? That's me. What was that? Did you hear that? Get my 6. So, Kapre, there's something very interesting about Bigfoot Sasquatch. I've done research for years. Every major culture around the world has a Bigfoot Sasquatch type creature in their folklore. And so if you study history and you study the history of stories, you would first say, well, okay, travelers from other countries went to those other countries and spread those stories, and this is how it caught on. That's not the case with this Bigfoot Sasquatch stuff, because these creatures existed in these other countries before world travel was really a thing. You know, in China, they have one called a Yeren. In Australia, shout out to all of our Australian viewers. You guys and girls are wonderful. We have a lot of viewers in Australia. They have a creature called the Yowie. The Himalayas, of course, has Yeti, the abominable snowman. Even in England, shout out to our viewers in England. I've been to England a couple times, beautiful country, wonderful people. They have like the hairy man of the forest, I think they call him. But it's kind of and correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, it's like a cross between a werewolf and a Bigfoot Sasquatch. So in the Philippines, they have one known as Kapre. Now, of course, the full-length novel talks about the whole thing. And it's a story about going to this haunted island and trying to rescue the beautiful maiden who had been taken by Kapre. It's really crazy. It's written as fiction, but good luck finding the parts that aren't real. That's all I'm going to say about that. So with that said, here's today's story. This story comes from Bigfoot Sasquatch Files Volume 11, which was published a few weeks ago. It's on Amazon in print and Kindle. I know a lot of you have read it. Thank you for getting the book. I know a lot of you, just really can't, you don't have the extra money. It's like, I think it's like $6.99 in print, $7 for the print copy, because it's 20,000 words. All the various short stories. And I think Kindle's like $3, but yeah, that's a lot of money coming out of a pandemic when a lot of people lost their jobs and stuff. So I do like to come out here and read some of these for you myself, and I'm going to do that tonight. So with no further ado is my beautiful bride, aka Dearly. Anyway, beautiful bride Dearly, aka Giggly Girl, would say. Let's get into this story. This is a story, it's one of several, and I'm going to go ahead, I don't want to be a spoiler here, but the best story in that book is the last one, and it's kind of lengthy, and actually half the book is just that one story. I'm going to read that to you on Halloween, actually Halloween. That's what I have planned. Everybody's like, what do you got planned for Halloween? Because we've got other things planned too that I don't really want to talk about right now because I'm not so sure who's listening. So, once upon a time on Halloween in the Philippines. It's known that different cultures around the world celebrate the same holidays in different ways. For example, people in a small province in France still practice the tradition of burning a Yule log during the Christmas season. A large tree is felled 12 days before Christmas, and parts of it are burned each night up until and including Christmas Eve. Many people actually make sure the fire never goes out. This is done by making sure to post fire guards who stay awake all night in order to keep the log burning. I get the whole Yule log thing. I mean, the tradition goes way back, and they even sing about it in several Christmas songs. But you know what's weird? In Japan, a common Christmas tradition is to eat KFC for Christmas dinner. Yes, by KFC, I do mean Kentucky Fried Chicken. But hey, if you think that's weird, in Slovakia, they eat carp for dinner at Christmas. I just love the way things are done. I love it. As odd as the previously stated Christmas traditions sound, I have to say, at least these odd traditions are celebrated on Christmas, as in December 25th. I'll cut the revelers of these odd traditions some slack for that. But what I have a hard time dealing with is when holidays are celebrated on different days and in much different ways than I'm used to. I don't judge, of course, because that's not my way, but it is awfully hard for me to wrap my head around some of the extreme differences, such as dates. The example I'm taking the long way to get in around to here, I've been told I have a tendency to do that, is the tradition of Halloween in the Philippines and how the holiday is celebrated. More than that, however, the time has come to relay a story of one such Halloween night that I spent in the Philippines that would go on to change the way I viewed the tradition, as well as my belief in things that may or may not exist. Because on that fateful Halloween night in the Philippines, many years ago now, I saw something that is not supposed to exist, and it would motivate me to take quite an adventure on a neighboring island that was riddled with mythical creatures and situations that are not supposed to exist. And the trip to that island resulted in this previously upside down book. I'm telling you, gotta read it. Get it on Amazon, print or Kindle, but get it from our Etsy store. Links in the description box below. I send you a personally autographed copy. All right. Thank you to the thousands of you who have done that. All right. So let me explain. Halloween in the Philippines is not celebrated on the 31st of October. It is celebrated on November 1. This, we know in the West, is the Day of the Dead. It is the first of the 3 days that it is believed our loved ones, or our enemies, come back in spirit form and begin walking the earth for 3 days before returning to their graves and the world beyond. On November 2nd, also known as All Souls Day, That's when they return to their grave. The tradition stems from Spain and their 433 years long occupation of the Southeast Asian archipelago. I can spell it, I can't pronounce it. Archipelago, chain of islands. Here's some irony. My best mile time back in the day was 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Hi, Debbie. Mail lady, lives up the road, likes to honk when she goes by. She's a wonderful person. Her and Phil, I used to work with them. Okay, so Debbie, you made me lose my train of thought. Oh, 4:33, best mile time. That's how long Spain occupied the Philippines before we ran them out, the U.S. and just the U.S. in the Spanish-American War in 1898. But my point is, how ironic is that my best mile time, I was a state champion in a mile back in high school, which allowed me to go to college on a tuition waiver and get an education and all these things. Then I marry a woman from a country who was occupied for 4:33. Wow. It's like mind blown. All right, back to the story. Okay. The practice is also observed in Mexico and most of Latin America, as it stems from Catholicism, the religion brought to all of these nations by way of the Spanish. On November 1, families begin gathering in graveyards and cemeteries where their loved ones are buried. They bring food and drink and blankets upon which to eat and drink, and basically, it's like, one big family reunion / party at the site of their loved ones' graves. This is nothing like Halloween, I said to my friend Rico. It was the first time I was to attend one such gathering. I'd been in the Philippines several times off and on, but it was the first time I was to spend Halloween in the country. My beautiful bride, dearly, aka Giggly Girl, didn't put that in here, I should have, had refused to go to the celebration with me because she was too scared. As a millennial who'd had the advantage of internet and social media from her teen years on, she was very familiar with the concept of Halloween in the West. And whereas she had been able to participate in her country's form of celebrating Halloween, which again was not on Halloween, but on the Day of the Dead, during her childhood, she had reached the point to where Halloween brought visions of Michael Myers and his big knife and everybody's inability to kill him and hanging out overnight on what overnight on what they called Halloween night in a graveyard was simply beyond anything she was willing to do. You stay with Rico, she told me before I'd gone out to participate in the festivities with many of her family members. Rico was married to her favorite cousin, so she and I thought I'd be safe. She'd been kind enough to cook a tray of lumpia for me. It's like Philippines versions of spring rolls, and they're delicious. Everybody that's eaten my wife's lumpia, they just show up looking for more. All right, not really. They text first. She made a tray of lumpia for me to take to the celebration, and our son had not yet been born. At 6 months pregnant, my wife was only beginning to show. We go to Big Tree, Rico said, as he and I arrived at the cemetery about an hour before dark. Mind you, darkness falls early in the Philippines. Being that the country is located only 7 degrees above the equator, it gets dark around 6 o'clock p.m. and daylight around 5 o'clock a.m. all year round. That was cool for a while, but got to me after a couple of years. We visit Lola's grave. The term Lola in the Philippines means grandmother, but this was no ordinary grandmother's grave. This was the grave of a grandmother who'd lived a couple of very interesting years during the youth of her life. I was told by several of Lola's adult children and adult grandchildren that night, as we sat around the tomb of Lola, of the most amazing 2-year experience in Lola's life, which every single family member present swore on their own lives was true, and a story which by the time the night was through, I would believe was true as well. Staying hydrated, Carrie D, both of yous. Okay. In the Philippines, and again, based on Spanish tradition, people do not bury their dead. They are enclosed in large, heavy cement-type caskets, and the caskets are left to lie above the ground. Side note, I went to Key West, Florida a long time ago, 20 years ago. I saw some old Spanish graveyards down there because Spain, settled Florida. It's really neat how they do it. It's different. Okay. Basically, when you walk through a Filipino graveyard, it looks like a huge field filled with cement caskets. They are placed very close together, especially where the poorest of the poor are laying to rest, and one must actually walk on top of the caskets to travel through the graveyard. No one views doing so as disrespectful. This was not the case, however, where Lola lay in her cement casket. Lola's cement tomb was standing off by itself. It was positioned under a giant mango tree, which had stood in the field for more than a century. There was a small bamboo fence erected around her tomb, so whereas so many other families in the cemetery that night were cramped together side by side, we had the luxury of at least having enough space to stretch out. I was there when she was taken, Marissa, Rico's great aunt, said. Marissa was in her 70s, and she was the youngest sibling and only remaining living sibling of Lola. I was only 8 years old, Marissa continued. I am so grateful I was not yet a teenager, or I may have been taken with her. Though Marissa spoke decent English, I was having a hard time just following the story, but believing it, for you see, the abduction of her older sister that she was referring to made absolutely no sense to me in my Western mind. For you see, Marissa, as well as all of Lola's other family members, were claiming that Lola had been taken by a Kapre, held captive for 2 years, and then released upon her continued requests. At this point, many readers are saying, what in God's name is a Kapre? Well, dear readers, in this case, dear listeners, had you read the completely and insanely awesome book titled Isle of Kapre by the freaking totally awesome writer Kevin E. Lake, you would already know this answer. But it's okay, we're cutting you some slack, I won't give it to you here. Okay, with shameless self-promotion over, I will at this time explain what a Kapre is for all of the readers who did not read the completely and insanely awesome book titled Isle of Kapre, which you can get for an autograph from our Etsy store. Look at this girl just showed up. Hi, girl. Say hi to the camera. See the camera? Say hi. I hope I got her on film. It's a doe. All right, anyway. I don't have anything for you. Wow, look at that. I don't have anything for you. I don't have any food. Don't have any food for them. They just take off running. Okay. All right. You guys know I have ADD by now, and I get distracted by all this wonderful wildlife that lives here on our, which is pretty much like a nature refuge because we don't hunt or anything. We just have all these, free-range deer and squirrels and turkeys and bears everywhere. And potentially, some free-range Bigfoot Sasquatch. Now, on with the story. Basically, the Kapre is the Filipino version of the North American Bigfoot Sasquatch. It is a large, as in 8 feet tall and 800 pounds, bipedal creature that resembles the missing link. However, there are quite a few distinct differences between our foul-smelling North American friend and his, or her, or its, or theirs Southeast Asian counterparts. Firstly, and I'm not so sure the two creatures are different in this way, the Filipino Kapre is an interdimensional being. It travels through dimensions by way of portals that exist in very tall trees, much like the mango tree that we were gathered under in the cemetery. The reason I say I'm not so sure that this is much different than the North American Bigfoot Sasquatch is because my own research of Bigfoot Sasquatch, now that I'm living back in the United States, has suggested on more than one occasion that our Bigfoot Sasquatches are also interdimensional. I know, call me a nut, call me a kook. Everybody's saying, no, they're animals, flesh and blood, blah, blah. You guys have seen some weird stuff in this videos. So whatever, I keep getting distracted. Secondly, all Kapres are males. I know, right? So how do they reproduce, you ask? Well, this is where Lola's story comes in. It is believed by the islanders that the Kapre come out of their portals at night and kidnap beautiful young Filipino maidens who are out, usually alone, in order to leave no witnesses. They take these beautiful young ladies into their dimensions with them by way of the portals, and there they add them to their harem. These women give birth to the next generation of Kapres, and they are never seen again. except for Lola, of course, but we'll get to that momentarily. Thirdly, whereas our North American Bigfoot Sasquatch does not change forms, another aspect of Bigfoot Sasquatch that is coming under debate, because many people feel Bigfoot Sasquatch have the ability to shapeshift. The Kapre, once inside his dimension, sheds his suit of fur and is said to be one hell of a handsome son of a B-word. For example, the Kapre in the completely and insanely awesome novel titled Isle of Kapre, written by the amazingly awesome writer Kevin E. Lake, actually very closely resembled heartthrob British actor Pierce Brosnan. Dude's in his 60s and he's still like, you know, super handsome. Yeah, dude, you take off his skin, he looked just like Pierce Brosnan, okay? So, now that the reader, or the listener in this case, has a general understanding of what a Kapre is, it is time for Lola's story. It's quite simple, and again, at the time I was told it, I found it to be quite unbelievable. Basically, while Lola and her little sister Marissa were walking along the beach of their secluded village just before dark, many, many years ago, a Kapre dropped out of a tree, grabbed up Lola, who they said was the most beautiful woman in all the islands in her youth. Hey, I'm married to her granddaughter. I believe it. You've seen how beautiful my wife is. If you haven't, go check her out on her channel, Life with Dearly. The link is in the description box below. Okay. And before Marissa could call out for help, the Kapre had returned to the tree, climbed to the top, and then taken Lola through his portal with him to the other side to be a prized edition trophy to his harem. How did she get back, I asked, when first being told the story. She begged, Marissa said. The Kapre, he really loved her, so after 3 years, he let her come back. Just like that, I asked, now starting to catch a really nice buzz from the Tandawai rum that Rico and I had been drinking. Notice I did not say the Tandawai rum that Rico and I had been enjoying. That's because one does not enjoy Tandawai rum. There are a lot of folks been to the Philippines watching this. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It is rot gut rum. It literally makes you, I'm going to change the word here to poop, blood the day after you drink it. It is consumed for the sole purpose of getting drunk, and it allows one to get drunk on the cheap, as a pint of the stuff costs only $2 US. You get what you pay for. Just like that, Rico said. And you guys believe all this, I said, incredulous. If Lola not returned by Kapre, Rico said, my mother is never born, and I am never born. There's got to be more to the story, I said. Are you sure Lola didn't just run off and elope with some guy that the family didn't approve of? And then she just came back 2 or 3 years later because the relationship didn't work out? This is the way my logical mind worked, as this was all before I would travel to a very unique island and experience some very unique things. None of the least were an actual experience with an actual Kapre. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself, and we don't need to go that far forward for my first Kapre experience, as I would soon have it that very Halloween night in that cemetery. We only tell facts, Rico said. What you decided to believe is your right. That was one thing I came to really appreciate about Filipino culture, and to this day it is. If you questioned a story or an action or a statement, the response was never to jade, which is justify, argue, defend, or explain, but rather a sternly stated response of, that is your right not to believe, that is your right not to believe or to believe. I like it. They don't go around trying to explain themselves and trying to convince people. Whatever, dude. You know how much time that saves? As the night went on and the food was consumed and the rot gut Tandawai rum flowed, we exchanged many stories. Rico's family members in attendance enjoyed hearing stories of how we celebrate Halloween in the U.S. by way of dressing up in costumes and going around our neighborhoods and getting oodles and oodles of candy. The children present at Lola's gravesite that night were particularly fond of this part of my story, as could be imagined. Sometime after midnight, Rico and I found ourselves being the only ones still awake. His aunts and uncles and cousins and siblings were all asleep, sleeping on the ground, some on top of light blankets and some on the grass. Yes, it was November 1, but it was tropical, and the temperatures, though midnight, were still in the low 80s. At some point after 2 a.m., Rico trailed off in the middle of a sentence. I know I was really feeling the effects of the Tandawai, so I just took it to mean that he was asleep. So I figured I'd go to sleep too. I set down the glass from which I'd been drinking the rot gut rum and lay on one side, prepared to sleep. However, just as I closed my eyes, I felt someone tapping me on the shoulder. It was Rico. He'd not gone to sleep after all. "What?" I said, speaking softly and sitting back up. "Shh," Rico said, putting the tip of one finger to his mouth, just like I just did. Wow. It's like you almost think I knew what was coming, like maybe I wrote it. He then used the tip of that same finger to point up in the tree. I looked up, and at first I thought it was the rum playing tricks on me, as I clearly saw a large dark figure moving from limb to limb at the top of the tree. I watched as the figure descended and then plopped onto the ground at the base of the trunk of the tree and at the head of Lola's tomb. The figure standing before Rico and me, as we sat in silence, scared to move a muscle and make even the faintest of sounds, was without question the mythical Kapre of the Philippines. We watched as the beast broke character, at least according to what I'd been told, and slipped out of his big, hairy, beastly suit and revealed to us a man who, though not as handsome as Pierce Brosnan, because come on, who is? He was very handsome nonetheless. He wasn't a Pierce Brosnan. The man held in his hand a single rose. It was red. He knelt down beside Lola's casket and he lightly kissed the casket, and then he laid the rose on the head of the casket. He stood head down and seemed to shed a single tear that Rico and I could see by the dim light of a dozen candles on Lola's tomb that would soon burn out. Then, as mysteriously as this man had appeared, he slipped his outer Kapre suit back on, and he was once again a mighty, mythical, interdimensional beast. And then he swiftly and silently ascended to the top of the tree where, I'm assuming, he went back through his portal and into his dimension. I looked at Rico. His eyes rolled into the back of his head and he passed out. I wasn't sure if it was due to the shock or the rot gut rum, and I didn't try to decipher because I then passed out myself, not from shock, but due to the rot gut rum. When I woke up early the next morning, just a few short hours after having fallen asleep, I was so not enjoying that not so wonderful state of still being half drunk from the night before and half hungover because it was the next day. Rico handed me the only thing that could ease the situation: more rum. The hair of the dog that bit ya. As I tipped the bottle up and drank, my eyes caught sight of Lola's casket and the single red rose that lay on top of it. This confirmed what Rico and I had seen only hours before, and as far as I'm concerned, it confirmed the entire story the family had told me about Lola and the experience she had had with the Kapre when she'd been a beautiful young Filipina maiden. So yes, holidays might be celebrated quite differently among the different cultures and countries around the world, but my experiences living within other cultures around the world and various nations have taught me is that the magic, or what it's taught me, is that the magic of the holiday, despite the culture or the country where the holiday is being celebrated, is real. It is very real. And just as magical things happen on Christmas the world over, whether one is burning an entire tree in Slovakia or merely stove-length pieces of some really well-seasoned red oak back in Virginia. I hope that didn't piss too many of you off. I even wrote that in here. Creepy things happen the world over during Halloween season, whether it's seeing an actual ghost in a graveyard after taking a dare on Halloween night, October 31 in the US or in the UK, or finding yourself witnessing a Kapre coming back to leave a rose for a deceased lover in a graveyard on a small remote island in the Philippines during the celebration of the Day of the Dead, November 1, but which they refer to as Halloween. The oddities of Halloween and the activities of Bigfoot Sasquatch and all of his, her, it, or their close relatives the world over make the time of year quite special indeed. The end. Hope you enjoyed that. See you tomorrow for another one.